The story of Noah and the flood evolved from ancient Near Eastern narratives from Mesopotamian civilization. The most famous of these is the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh. In this account, which was probably inspired by a devastating flood at the ancient Shuruppak in modern-day Iraq, where the hero Utnapishtim lived, his rescue from the cataclysm occurs inadvertently through the betrayal and subterfuge of one of the gods acting against the other gods. In these stories, various others are also rescued from the flood, together with the hero and his family, the builders of the boat, the boatmen, relatives, and friends. In Genesis, however, God despairs of the moral corruption of humanity and saves only one man and his family, Noah, who is described as blameless in his age and who walked with God. In the biblical account, humanity is descended from one single family, and this is emphasized in a chapter towards the end of the parashah. After the deluge, an epilogue is added, a section which is known as the Table of Nations. The name of Noah and his sons are listed, together with their descendants, numbering 70. That number is not merely fortuitous. In the Torah, 70, like the number 7, is typological. That is, it's used for rhetorical effect to evoke the idea of totality, comprehensiveness, 70 on a large scale, 7 on a smaller scale. The Table of Nations and the number 70, says Nahum Sana in his commentary, is a literary device to convey the notion of the totality of the human race. And he continues, this strangely perplexing miscellany of peoples, tribes, and places is no mere academic or scholastic exercise. It affirms, first of all, the common origin and absolute unity of humankind after the flood. Then it tacitly but effectively asserts that the varied instrumentalities of human divisiveness are all secondary to the essential unity of the international community, which truly constitutes a family of man. That common origin and absolute unity of humankind is important, but so is the celebration of diversity, 70 nations, 70 languages. This is a story that challenges any ideology or theology of human hierarchy. As the Mishnah states, the Holy One created Adam alone to teach the importance of maintaining peace, so that one person will not say to another, my ancestor is greater than your ancestor. I wanted to reflect on this interpretation of our parashah in the light of the historic visit to the Vatican made by the King and Queen this week, at which Pope Leo XIV, the head of the Catholic Church, stood between the monarch, the supreme governor of the Church of England, and Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York, as they prayed together, the first time this act of ecumenism had happened in 500 years. And this moment of ecumenism represents a significant development in the history of the Catholic Church that took place almost exactly 60 years ago, a particular moment in the Catholic Church that took place almost exactly 60 years ago on the 28th of October, 1965. just 20 years after the end of the Second World War and the atrocities of the Shoah were revealed to the world, the Second Vatican Council published Nostra Aetate, in our time, its declaration on how the Catholic Church viewed the role of the ancient Hebraic covenant and the Jews, while at the same time remaining faithful to Christian scripture and theology. It was written at a time of honest and soul-searching examination of interfaith as well as interracial relationships. This was also the decade of civil rights. It was a remarkable document in its time because of its rejection of anti-Semitism, ancient hatreds, persecutions against Jews at any time by anyone. It said, "We cannot truly call on God, the Father of all, if we refuse to treat in a brotherly way any man created as he is in the image of God." This is what it declared in its gendered language of the mid-60s. And we should acknowledge the step it took to reject centuries of projecting onto Jews the accusation of deicide. But at the same time, the architects of Nostra Aetate were wrestling with the question that Emmanuel Levinas, the French Jewish philosopher and theologian, asks in relation to dialogue. How can a being enter into relation with the other without allowing its very self to be crushed by the other? The Catholic Church could not deny its own beliefs, seeing as it did in the beginning of the Hebrew Scriptures, Abraham, Moses, and the prophets, a pathway of revelation for Christians that would lead to salvation. Jews, it said, hadn't recognized what it called the time of the church's visitation, nor did the Jews, it said, in large number, accept the gospel. And it saw the salvation of the church as mystically prefigured in the exodus of God's chosen people from the land of bondage. In other words, it re-emphasized in many ways the divided theology between Jews and Christians. The exodus from Egypt is seen in Nostra Aetate as foreshadowing the coming of the Messiah, whether for us as Jews, slavery, the Exodus, and Sinai are the foundational narratives on which Jewish law, morality, and observance are based. Divided theologies aside, what Nostra Aetate did in its time was to emphasize the common spiritual patrimony of Jews and Christians, a shared heritage that urged all to foster and recommend mutual understanding and respect, which, it said, is the fruit above all of biblical and theological studies, as well as of fraternal dialogues. It began and ended with our shared humanity. One is the community of all peoples, one their origin, for God made the whole human race to live over the face of the earth. The Vatican's language echoes the concepts underlying the story of Noah and the Table of Nations: one ancestor, one family, many nations, many religions, but one humanity. In the 60 years that have passed since Nostra Aetate, the Catholic Church has moved on significantly in its relationship with the Jewish people and Judaism. Gone is the evangelical necessity to convert the Jews to Christianity. Instead, in its reflection on 50 years since Nostra Aetate, entitled "The Gifts and the Calling of God Are Irrevocable," a quotation from Romans, the Catholic Church called on Christians and Jews together to be a blessing to the world, as Abraham was, and to make a joint contribution to humanitarian aid for justice and peace in the world, to work together to overcome human suffering and poverty. One important goal, dear to the heart of the late Pope Francis and indeed to the King, and enshrined in this reflection, is the conservation of creation and reconciliation. In the past, it said, it may have been that the different religions, against the background of a narrowly understood claim to truth and a corresponding intolerance, contributed to the incitement of conflict and confrontation. But today's religions should not be part of the problem, but part of the solution. Only when religions engage in successful dialogue with one another, and in that way contribute towards world peace, can this be realized also on the social and political levels. The Jewish community, in its turn, has not been silent in its response to these reflections, and has over the years produced its own statements, redefining the Jewish people's relationship with Christians and Christianity, and acknowledging that we must be partners to address the moral challenges of our era and work together for world redemption. She will not thank me for mentioning her, but I want to acknowledge the help and counsel that my dear friend, Sister Margaret Shepherd, gave me as I prepared this sermon, and in many conversations that we've had over 40 years of friendship. Sister Margaret, a sister of Zion, has spent a lifetime close to Jewish communities, studying Judaism and teaching about Judaism to Catholics and many, many others. It is the mission of the Sisters of Zion to educate about the Jewish roots of Christianity, to counter anti-Semitism, and promote dialogue and learning about Judaism and the Jewish people. And Sister Margaret has devoted her life to this. But that hand of friendship, learning, and true understanding is not a one-way process. As Jews, we too have much to learn about other religions and much to overcome of our own prejudices and ignorance. Learning together, listening to each other, honoring each other's faith, respecting each other's scriptures and traditions are fundamental in combating wariness and ignorance about each other. I know scholarship is not for everyone, but when I attend our drop-in and encounter our volunteers and our guests, whose faiths are as different as the colors of the rainbow, I see that coming together to do something that ameliorates the circumstances of our guests in this country can also overcome old superstitions simply by standing next to each other and engaging in casual conversations. It is at these times of learning, encounter, dialogue, and growing friendship we are reminded that we are the children of one God, descended from one human being, one family, one humanity, and that our mission is to be like Noah, a builder, a preserver of life, witnesses to the divine image in every individual. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.